Okay, everybody. Hello. This is another video. I think it's the fifth on Board and Livingness, and today is gonna be a little bit grim and spooky, at least in the beginning, because today we're gonna talk about conditions, starting, of course, from the Board and Livingness. Conditions, okay? That's Department 19. After existence, Department 20, and after source, Department 21, you have conditions. And let's see, cut right to the chase and see what LRAs have to say. You have the first cognition is that there is a condition. That's the first thing a person has got to learn, that there is a condition, C in capital C. The world is drifting around. They think there are lots of people who take care of the mind, and they think there are lots of doctors around that heal everything, and they think there are governments that are taking care of their citizens. They are in some happy little titty-witty dream, and they never really looked at the conditions. You see, this guy is going around and he isn't the least bit aware of his own condition. Not even the least bit aware of his own condition. You know what's going to happen to him? This is the grim part now. Do you realize that very shortly he'll be dead? That's the condition he is in. He is going to die. And do you know that you could look somebody right straight between the eyes and tell that with the greatest of truth, he is going to die. He is going to die. Okay, not joking here, but it's a little bit, grim and sad, because that's what's going to happen. It seems so ordinary to a human being that he should die that it doesn't even occur to him as a condition. It's a condition of his day-to-day life. He is getting older, so he's going to die. When you say this to somebody, it puts him into a little bit of a state of a shock. You say, you're going to die. That's the condition you are in. You're going to die. And do you know the whole medical profession and all insurance companies have built all of their business on that one statement? You are going to die. That's the condition. That's the condition of the human race. So it actually goes from death, see, into the first part of our board, which is, we say, at this point of the board, Accelerate's saying this, it's not necessarily true that you're going to die. Yes, well, if you keep on going the way you are going to die. But it's not necessarily true at this part of the board. You don't have to die. And that's a condition of Scientology, see? You don't have to get sick, and these things don't have to happen to you. In other words, conditions can be bettered. You get somebody to realize his condition, and so forth. Moving on to next page. My other phone is a little bit slow. So we get a whole new battery of processes, by the way, that come out underneath this thing that we've always taken for granted and which has made it difficult for us to sell the individual Scientology. And by applying those various processes, you, becoming accomplished in these things, will be able to walk out on the street and tag somebody. And it doesn't matter whether you tag him or he tags you, why, in short order, if you handle this thing right, you're just looking at the Scientologist right there. Because what have you done? You've put him into the first condition. You're trying to establish in a being. Let me read this correctly. Going back, you've put him into the first condition, which is a realization that such a thing as Scientology exists, and that's the first condition you are trying to establish in a being. And it gives you the drill of exactly how you do this to anybody, whether he's a paranoid or a nut. And the only person you wouldn't convince and so forth would be somebody who was utterly unconscious, like a psychiatrist. Now, the fellow is too far gone. You can't talk to a dead man about it because he isn't there. And I don't think I'm talking to dead people here. Of course I'm not. We're all alive. We just don't have the data. That was my input. Now, this isn't a matter of death. These conditions can be very high. And the funny part of it is that all processing from that point there on always contains a condition. This is then in common to the remainder of the chart. So, as you move in from left to right, that's the org board, from left to right, this one always carries along slightly with it. But after you have a condition, what have you got to do? Well, ladies and gentlemen, now here we really are into the chase. I don't know if this is like cut into the chase or where this is the meat and potatoes. We're halfway through the lecture. And now he starts explaining the departments and their awareness characteristics. So we were at conditions, okay? 19. Of course, here he doesn't mention Department 1 because you have 21, 20, 19. That's the executive, Division 7. And then it starts with HCO, Division 1, with Department 1. And what's the awareness characteristic? It's a recognition. He doesn't mention it here, but maybe he mentions it in another place because he goes right there into the communications division. But he says, but after you've had a condition, what have you got to do? Well, an old-time auditor like you ought to know you'd better communicate with it. So that is our next department. So he moves on to the Department 2, omitting Department 1 recognition, but he implies that because he says, after you've had a condition, meaning recognize the condition. When you have a condition, this is why you have Department 1, which has to do with routing, personnel, recruitment, and stuff like that, reception. You recognize the condition. You're there in Department 1. I have been a recruiter in Department 1. I've done other things also. But mainly Department 1 recognition is Department 1 in any organization, also on yourself. You got a Department 1. Because somebody is there, that's HCO, put someone there, and that someone, if he's nuts, he's not nuts, and he's brains and whatever is okay, he's of a sane mind, he sees a condition and he recognizes it. So, what do you do after you had a condition and you have recognized it? What have you got to do? Well, an old-time auditor like you ought to know you'd better communicate with it. So that is our next department. And we have the Department of Communications, number 2. And the name of the level is communications. That's all. That's the bridge also, Now, now that we've got the guy, sorry, my phone lags a little bit. Now that we have got the guy, so he knows a condition and he can communicate, he can now find out some more by perceiving. Reminds you of something? I'm doing these inputs because some people are not at all familiar with the org board, and it's a pity because before you go OT, you have at least to know the org board, because the org board and the awareness characteristics, let's say, they flow. And now we got into perceiving. So the next point is perception. And that's Department 3. Because Department 3 ethics, as they call it, and some are like, oh my God, there's been so terrible ethics officers and ethics things, interviews and blah, 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 interrogations. It's all perception. That's all. And that's the awareness characteristics above it. So, if he can communicate and he is of sane mind, he can perceive. So the next point is perception. The next department must be perception. And that is the Department of Inspections and Reports, INR. Elementary. If you think it over for a moment, you'll find out that communication must precede perception. Very, very delicate little point. But some people perceive before they communicate. Oh, they know. Before they communicate, they just perceive. And that's an opinion or whatever. They haven't communicated. And he says, very, very delicate little point, communication must precede perception. Now, we're done with Division 1, thank God, Oh my God, we're done with a couple of divisions, 7 and 1. Let's get into Division 2. Now, the next line after this is orientation. And that's Department 4, the first department of Division 2. After you have perceived, you know where you are. So you have something known as orientation. You can orient yourself. If you are ever having a nightmare, that's a nice joke, I remember that. All you got to do is open one eye, and find out where you are, and you cease to have the nightmare. Most elementary process I know of, and so it is in life. This fellow comes along and he's been having nightmares up to this point that he calls life. Sorry, but this is like... And he then, being aware that conditions can exist and being able to communicate with those conditions, perceives and so orients himself and finds out that he has been living in a thing called a nightmare. You see, he would just like that. So that these earlier stages now are walking along with us, see? We haven't mixed this next one yet, but there it is. Whoa, okay. I used to laugh and I still laugh with LRH. It's like, so it's not hilarious. It's like more than hilarious. It's tragic, because the guy says all these things, all these so fundamental things, in such a way. I wish I had this knack, of his. Anyway, thank you, sir. In the next step, after one has achieved orientation, is of course understandings. We talked about this, I think. It's understanding, it's plural, it's countable. It's not one understanding that all philosophers have been searching for. It's understandings, and that's Department 5. Understandings is the bookstore officer, by LRH, because over there you get understandings. I mostly got my understandings from the books of L. Ron Hubbard by reading, studying them, clearing up my words, like religiously doing word clearing and stuff like that. Okay, in the next step, so after one has achieved orientation is of course understandings, but orientation, weirdly enough, is the department of compilation. After you see where you are, you note it down. After you put a few of these notes together and so forth, they add up to a compilation of orientation. Sorry, phone again. To a compilation of orientation, and you can hand them to people and they can orient themselves, don't you see? But you can't hand them to people without understandings. You've got to compile them into understandings. Do you see? Organizationally, we are tracking. You get subtly shifting from case to organization, don't you see? Understandings, of course, is what else but the Department of Publications. So orientation is the Department of Compilations. You note those down and you note them and then you make them into understanding. So we get into the Department of Publications, Department 5. I said books are officer. I'm not the race, I told you. They would of course publish what's to be understood. Do you follow? But a bricklayer, she had run into a condition. She communicated with it, perceived what it was, oriented himself in it. Now he would understand it. So his level at this point would be understandings. He would be able to attain understandings and not, for God's sakes anymore, please, we had the error too long. He doesn't attain at that point understanding. It's understandings. He gets understandings. And his understandings, of course, have been compiled under orientation. He took notes and he put them all together and they became understandings. Well, of course, they can become published. He can now say, look what I understood. He can now tell people what he understood. He can now tell himself what he understood. And I think that's all understanding is telling yourself. Okay, well, we haven't finished with Division 2, but I think I will end it here because it's already 17 or 18 minutes now. As you see, the guy goes back from conditions to recognition, which he omitted here, but that's fine, it's understood. Communication, perception, orientation, understandings. And we're gonna see in the next video, maybe I'll do it tonight. I'm in the mood. I love this. This is the best thing maybe I've ever done, instead of just, trying to persuade people who didn't have the understandings, So, and what's the best definition of understanding is telling yourself. All right, so that's it for this 5th video. We're into the, the very essence of the org board now, the awareness characteristics as departments and how they flow. Well, thank you very much. Bye-bye.